All right. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Walkout Network. It's your man, Ant Walker. I'm here to debut Unleashed, a new panel discussion show. And yes, it might look a little familiar to you, but we retooled some things, moved it to a different platform. And the two staples of this show are back. We got the senior editor of Sherdog.com, Ben Duffee. Ben, the jack of all trades who's mastered them all. How are you feeling, my man?
I'm feeling really good. It's been a really good day today, and I'm just excited to be back with y'all.
Absolutely, man. And of course, we've got the man himself, all about the stats, all about the math, all about the numbers, our legal expert, Jay Petrie. Jay, what's going on?
You know, I missed you guys. I really did. Gotta say, it's been a quiet couple weeks. So I got a gift to you guys. Just a fun little gift. Number 7. I'm not going to do the hand thing because I keep mixing it up. The number 7. It's the number of post-fight bonuses that Justin Gaethje has earned in 6 UFC fights, which, by the way, no other fighter has done something like that. Not even close. Six fights, 7 bonuses. Yeah. So welcome to the show.
Joe Lozon, eat your heart out. And rounding out today's panel, we've got the host, co-founder, actually founder, because he did that shit by himself. Also, Mixed Combat Radio, formerly of the Boxing Voice, and a contributor to Sherdog.com for photos and video. My homie, Matt Hunter, what's going on?
I'm good, man. Obviously, thank you for having me on. Shout out to Jay and Ben for being on, because, I mean, when I heard they were on, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, Ant's all right.
But... Yeah, the thrill is gone. We've seen each other and worked together enough now.
It's whatever. And
you're okay.
Yeah, you're all right. But I'll be honest. Since I went to the whole KSI Logan Paul press conference, I've been like needing like this, just like a couple guys talking about combat sports. And it's hardcore, and it's not surrounded by 13-year-olds running around screaming Logan Paul KSI. I have to like scrub that from my memory bank somehow, but I'm here. Hit the like button, share the show, all that fun stuff.
I'm really glad that I didn't actually get the press email for that conference. Like I made the mistake of tuning into it. And I was like, wow, what am I watching here? Whatever they were chanting, dude said like JJ has no dick, and like trying to get the crowd to say it. It was like, yeah, we're done here. Like, I'm sorry. They're like actual fights going on. And yeah, KSW is better than that foolishness. So I had to, even a KSW card that was not very good Saturday was much better than that trash dumpster fire of a press conference. Oh man, I can't believe I'll be in the Staples Center for that one. Yeah, Matt, we'll have a lot of things to talk about in the near future about that.
You're for sure going for that one? Or is that...
Yeah, I'll go ahead and cover that one. Yes. Because like a carnival like that, why not?
God,
it just didn't justify me waking up early to make sure I got to downtown and so
in the heat, 95-degree weather, 60% humidity in downtown LA. Ooh. Oh, it was miserable. But anyways, we're here to like buying all that fun stuff, and let's talk some MMA.
All right, let's do it. So we are going to start, of course, with UFC Fight Night 158, also known as UFC Vancouver. That was headlined by Justin Gaethje, finishing Donald Cerrone in the first round. So with this, we have a lot of things going on at lightweight. And Justin Gaethje, of course, being the star of that show with his dramatic finish, you know, the UFC's got a few things that they can do with him. So I'm going to start with you, Matt. What do you think should be next for the highlight?
I think 2 things. Either one, he can wait for the winner of Khabib-Tony, or whoever Khabib fights next. You know, presumably it's Tony. George St. Pierre has been mentioned a lot. I know we don't want to mention his name around a Khabib fight because it could materialize, but it's a possibility. If it's Tony up next against Khabib, I say just wait. Unless the Conor fight's there, which is the other option, which is a giant money fight. It's probably a pay-per-view main event, and it's a winnable fight, obviously, for Justin Gaethje. If it's not those 2 options, then there's nothing that is appealing to me, to be quite honest. He should either wait for the title fight with Khabib, versus Tony, or fight Conor if that's available. Nothing really is on the table that makes sense at the lightweight division.
All right, so was I the only person that was kind of surprised by the call out of just Khabib or Tony, as opposed to the Masvidal Diaz BMF title going up for grabs, and Gaethje would seem like a guy who could fit right into that mix. And of course, the aforementioned Conor, who he was linked to fight previously. So, gentlemen, anyone else surprised by that?
I'm not too surprised. Gaethje has been pretty consistent in what he's been asking for, and he's the rare case of a guy that didn't start calling out Conor McGregor until the word came out, and Conor's actually the one who told us that, hey, they were trying to book me against him, and I hurt my hand training. At that point, Gaethje was like, well, yeah, I take that, because normally anyone who wins a fight in the UFC between 145 and 170, calling out Conor is like the I'm going to Disneyland moment. That's just what you do after you win. So this is the rare case of a winning contender actually asking for reasonable things. Give him Conor, give him the money fight, which would be, yes, a winnable fight for Gaethje, but also a winnable fight for Conor. There aren't many guys ranked that high that will play into what McGregor wants to do in a fight as well as Gaethje will. Or wait for the title shot. I'm glad he's not inserting himself into the Masvidal and Diaz stuff. I like him staying at lightweight. I like him waiting, in the line of actual contention. I'm glad he has not inserted himself into that. I like that for what it is, but really, that's just fortuitous timing, and it actually helps to give Masvidal something to do while 170 plays itself out.
All right. So Jay, man, what are your thoughts on this, man? Justin Gaethje, what's his ideal next opponent in your eyes?
I'm with Hunter. 100%. It has to be Khabib Ferguson. I don't think anything else really matters. I too, I'm very glad we didn't have that give me Tong Po type of Conor call out. I'm so happy we didn't get any of that nonsense. In fact, it's so much going to say, no, whatever. You guys do what you want. I'm okay. I mean, Gaethje has done surprising things for 6 fights. 6 fights is all he's had with the company. He's been with the company for like 2 and change years, and he has been at the top of the division pretty much the whole time. He lost twice, and he fought the top and he fought the top number 10 guy, Vic. So he's right there. Of what he's done, I have to think, even with the messed up title picture the lightweight has had for so long, I think that Gaethje has earned the next crack at the win. I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion they're going to make Khabib Tony, but if they don't, we've done something wrong. We have sinned in our past lives if they don't make Khabib Tony. I mean, Gaethje is he's the second. There go my hands again. The second lightweight in UFC history to rack up 3 straight first round knockouts. The only other guy to do that was BJ Penn when he was just a baby. There's no one else that makes sense. I mean, you got Ferguson, Poirier, Conor, and Cowboy ahead of him. Still, as of today, obviously Cowboy's not ahead of them because you just smoked him. But I have a side question. Do you guys think that the UFC rankers, as we know them and love them, and there was a Reddit post breaking them down recently, do you think they would rank Gaethje, who is number 5? I don't know what to do with my hands. Gaethje is ranked number 5. He knocked out. He beat the brakes off of any word you can use to say he beat up Cowboy, the number 4 guy. Conor's number 3. Do you think they'll slot Gaethje over Conor?
I think they can. It really depends on what Conor wants to do. That's kind of the question mark here, because say Khabib and Tony gets booked for sometime in the near future, and you have a quick turnaround and Gaethje sitting there ready and Conor isn't. It sounds pretty logical. We've been teased with Conor wanting to come back for quite some time. So at this point, will it happen? I have no idea. And especially considering that this last holdup was due to injury, that he did break his hand. Now he did say on that Ariel Helwani interview that it was healing and, he was starting to get back to his regular training, but broken hands don't always heal up the way they should. We just had a case recently, and why I can't remember the gentleman's name, but a UFC fighter who had his hand broken in a fight or in training, whatever, had surgery, and then right when he's supposed to be good to go and on the road to recovery, some sort of setback, and now he's not going to be eligible to fight again until early next year. So I think we should kind of pump the brakes on anyone leapfrogging anyone else. I think some of these things have to play out. And this is just assuming that Tony actually fights for the title. That's one key thing. We're assuming this. Gaethje assumed this, and a lot of people in our position where we follow this sport for a living are thinking this is the next logical step. But how many times was this the next logical step?
There is a distinct possibility as George St. Pierre. Like I know, I know that's like the giant.
I'm not owing you. I'm owing the concept.
But kill the messenger. Damn that.
I'm sorry. But first off, it's the biggest fight that they can make of all the options on the table. It just is. In pure money sense, it is. I think when we have Endeavor, going public and within the next year, their revenues are off the chart. I can see them even pushing that further and further because they're about to go public and they want to have the best year possible they can before they go public in the stock market. And a George St. Pierre Khabib fight to sort of finish the year or maybe early January would be 100% the move that Endeavor would make. Now, Dana White has obviously been very against it. I think he actually is adamant that he doesn't want it. I think it makes sense that he probably doesn't want it. I think they realize how much the George St. Pierre and Michael Bisping fight sort of set the middleweight division back a few years. And with the lightweight division, how good it is, how red hot it is, how it honestly is the money division in the UFC right now. Any threat to that, I think Dana White and certain people that have been with the UFC for a long time will be wary of. But Endeavor, I don't think they care right now. And a George St. Pierre Khabib fight is the biggest fight they can make right now, not including a Conor McGregor fight. And that could maybe even hit 2 million buys, to be quite honest.
Well, I mean, 2 million buys in the ESPN Plus era.
In the old era.
Yeah.
In this era, it could still maybe even hit 1 million. I mean, ESPN Plus still has 2 or 3 million subscriber base.
2.5 million, yeah.
And a large percentage of that is UFC fans. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that they at least do 700,000, 500,000 buys for that type of event. And on top of the 500,000 equivalent buy rate that they get from ESPN, that check that they get in the new paradigm, it's a blockbuster event. I don't know how they avoid it or ignore it. It has to be discussed, I think, at least from a corporate perspective. From a sporting perspective, of course, it should be ignored. But this is MMA, guys. Like, let's just be honest about it.
This is sport with quotation marks around it. Yeah. This is a lot of testosterone in the cage. So let's go ahead and talk about the other half of the main event and kind of what's next for him. So swing or miss, fellas. Donald Cerrone will fight 50 times in the UFC before he retires. Open forum on that one.
Swing.
Nope, not gonna. I'll take a miss on that one. He's at 32 now.
33.
33 now. I think there's a possibility he doesn't make it to 40. He's 36. He's got a baby boy. I know that the media has come under a certain amount of fire for appearing to play the dad Cerrone storyline up too much, but there is no denying that he exudes a completely different vibe as a person in the last 2 years. Like, I don't think it's going to take many times of him getting beat on when his kid is old enough to be like crying like Mark Coleman's kids back in Pride after like Fedor wasted him, for him to be like, I got other revenue streams. I'm not going to get that title that I really wanted for my trophy case. Maybe it's time for me to move on to the next thing. I think it's incredibly unlikely he makes it to 50 in the UFC. Like maybe he moves on to something else. And I think it is possible that he doesn't make it to 40. I think his days are semi-numbered by Donald Cerrone standards.
I will rebuttal that. I think it's completely possible. Donald Cerrone is one of the rare cases in the UFC where he actually gets tune-up fights. And he gets a lot of them, too. Mm-hmm. He has probably the closest we get to a boxing career within the UFC that we've seen in the last probably 10, 20 years. So I won't be surprised if he gets a healthy stable of tune-ups as he is accustomed to sort of build him back up. You can main event ESPN Plus cards against sort of fairly known prospects as long as he wants and beat them up like he did Alexander Hernandez. I think he can do that for some time. I will say this, though, to sort of give Ben some credence to his point. I do think Don Cerrone is deteriorating sort of in front of our eyes. I think it is visible that he cannot take a punch the same way anymore. I will say that. However, the UFC just doesn't care about that at all. Like, unless we're going to get clips of him getting bar fights and getting dropped numerous times, and that happened numerous years, I don't think Dana White or the UFC are going to go, hey, you have to stop here, Cerrone. They're going to let him keep fighting him. 18 more fights to get to 50, right? He's at 32 right now, so 18 more fights.
That's 6 fights a year for the next 3 years.
And he's a guy that is pretty active, so 4 to 6 fights a year. He could do that in 3 to 5 years, and I think he could do that. And that's not out of the realm of possibility at all. And it's a distinct possibility, especially with the way they matchmake his career.
I mean, let's even think about how he probably shouldn't have been in this fight with Gaethje in the first place. It was 2 months ago that his face looked like a balloon. When he got what we thought was an orbital fracture against Tony Ferguson. I guess ultimately it was not an orbital fracture, but didn't look like he was going to be a guy who was good to go in 2 months. So, and Matt, I think it's also a very good point that you mentioned, allude to BJ Penn at least. Like, how long has BJ Penn been washed? How long has he not belonged anywhere near a UFC logo? And somehow or another. Yeah, it took some controversy. It took controversy outside of the cage that has been going on. It's just this time it got caught in video and it looked particularly silly.
That's it.
That got him, booted out the UFC. And we actually don't have word that he was booted out of the UFC. Dana White just said, "Oh, he's not going to book him," but he said that before. And I think also too is another thing to remember. Cerrone the problem with Cerrone fighting a lot of these up and comers and a lot of these prospects is he doesn't give a damn who it is. Therefore, there's only a short matter of time before you run into a buzzsaw like Darren Till, before you run into that guy who is a killer that you just know nothing about because you weren't paying attention, who waxes you inside of a round. So Jay, man, any last thoughts on Donald Cerrone hitting 50?
Yep. Swing for the fences, Cowboy. And here's why. The post-fight interview he gave me with Cowboy with that look in his eye, which isn't a real thing, just showed me how much fun he had in there getting wailed on.
He loves it.
He loved every second of it. He's up to 33 fights. He averages just about 4 fights a year. And going through that way. He's 36 now. He'll be 37 in March. Yeah, he got thumped up by Gaethje. And he on one scorecard for Ferguson, he took the first round and then got lumped up and then blew his nose and he ballooned. He might have to settle for some non-headliners, be the sidecar attraction on some so-and-so card. But I'm going to give it to him. I'm going to give him. He's got. At the end of this year, he already has said this is something he already has come out with because, of course, he's a crazy person in a great way, I guess. He wants to fight again this year. It's September 16th, 2019. He just lost by first round knockout, and he wants to fight before the end of December 31st. And he probably will. I would not be surprised if he takes another fight. He didn't get hurt that badly. He was smiling, laughing, but that's the Cowboy way. So that'll be 34 by the end of this year. You're telling me he can't do 4 fights a year for 4 more years to hit that number and be in his very early 40s? I got to see that he can do it because it's who he is. But let me tell you, like Duffy said, though, to bounce off that, if he doesn't enjoy it like he used to, if he realizes his son sees him upset and doesn't like it anymore, it's over. But until that happens, 50 and beyond.
And I'll just add one point. Even in a dramatic KO loss, he was still smiling and happy. It's like Cerrone's one of those weird guys. Like, he's gonna be fighting until he's old, in my opinion.
I mean, he's not a normal person.
No, stop doing that.
He's not a normal person at all. Like that's not a normal response. I mean, even on the scale of fighters not being normal people, Donald Cerrone is not a normal person. So that is something to keep in mind. It's just that the body probably is going to give out before his love of combat does.
Yes, sir.
All right. So All right, so let's move on to another portion of the card, and that was the flashy dance moves of one Michel Pereira, who ended up dropping a decision to Tristan Connolly, who was a late notice replacement. So I'm going to leave this open to the panel, fellas. Do you think that Pereira was exposed at all during this fight?
This is a really weird position he's in. He fought on 5 days' notice, a lightweight in the area. This is all the things you check off, all the boxes. A guy moving up in weight on less than a week's notice, from the hometown. It's just all the things you just go, there's no way you can mess this up. He's like a 5-1 favorite and then some, and then he misses weight. And then I wrote this in a betting odds piece that will be published tomorrow. After he missed weight, the odds for his victory went down tremendously. He went from a 5-1 favorite to like a 3.5, 4 or so. This guy might have already hit his ceiling, and that's a really weird thing to say because we might have already seen everything he has to offer. Some of his strikes are super effective. The flying knees, when he at the very beginning of the fight, when he sprang off the cage and landed the right hand, some of that stuff is really good. You know what isn't? A backflip. You know what it also isn't? Multiple backflips. And that he did. There was a serious spin move he did where he warmed up to throw a capoeira kick and then didn't throw the kick. So it's just inefficiency that's strange. And then you add to the fact I got to throw one more thing in. So, okay, the backflip he tried to throw. So Tristan Connolly's on his back, and he stands up out of guard to jump a backflip to land on Connolly. If he had landed that strike, that is super illegal. That is all the way illegal. If he had hurt Connolly, he would have been DQ'd for it, if nothing else. In the LFA last year, a guy stomped on another guy on the body and got the finish, and the commissioner's like, you can't stomp on people when they're grounded. Absolutely not. What do you think? You're in Pride? So nothing good came of this. And he it was pointed out, it was ESPN or somebody like that wrote a piece about the upside of that he was covered in CNN and hey, he's got all this stuff. Well, he lost a bunch of money. He didn't get paid his win bonus. He lost. Oh, that's right. He also lost the other half of the $50,000 fight of the night. This is not a good look for him to go out and lay an egg like that. It just, I don't know what you guys think. What do you think? Duffee, Hunter, what do you got?
Duffee was right and wrong about this fight. I mean, I've not been, I never bought in on Michel Pereira. I figured he was due to get shown up sooner or later. But I was wrong in that I did not think Tristan Connolly was going to be the one to do it. I figured just even tripping over his own feet and just trying to pull off 15 different moves that didn't work, he'd still beat a lightweight stepping up on short notice. I didn't it was hard for me to even find much good film on Connolly. So I went with the known factor over the unknown, as did 20 of the 21 pickers in the Sherdog Pick'em League. I thought Pereira's moment of comeuppance was coming. I didn't think it was now. It was now, and he may well have hit his ceiling. Comparisons of him to Johnny Walker are not really, they're not really warranted. Walker's a wild dude, but he has a semblance of, he has an idea in his head of what it's going to take to win the fight. He's trying to put his fists and feet and elbows on the other guy's chin. He just has weird ways of going about it. Pereira looks like I'm playing Tekken with my brother, and I just grab his controller and throw it down the stairs, and he still beats me up. His controller rolling down the stairs still beat me somehow, and I'm like, what the hell? So, and the fact that he missed weight is disturbing, considering. You know, when a guy this short into his tenure in the UFC misses weight, you kind of wonder, you know, what realities in his training regimen may have had to change in the interim. So,
yeah, I mean, you first, Matt.
I'll put it this way. Look, I'm more of a boxing guy, so you know this, Ant. I don't know if Jay or Ben know this. I don't follow deep cut MMA as much as I used to because I can't. More of my beat is boxing now, right? So I didn't realize this guy had much of a hype train. I saw the Danny Roberts knockout, and that was flashy, but I didn't realize he had as much of a push kind of behind him as he did, because the guy has 10 losses on the regional scene,
something like that. Yeah.
He's 25, super young, and if you look at all those losses, they're all decisions. So there's a clear issue of him getting dominated, of him getting out-controlled, so to speak, right? And to Ben's point about just the technical analysis of him and Johnny Walker comparisons, Johnny Walker has strategy. And on top of that, he implements tactics to sort of achieve his overall strategic goals. Okay, you can tell. It may be unorthodox, it may be flashy, but he has strategy. He is setting up shots. He is setting up combinations. You can see it. If you know striking, you can see it. Pereira is Trey said, just doing backflips and more backflips and spinning shit. And you're just wondering, what are you doing? There's no semblance of thought going into it, no semblance of game plan, of strategy. And I looked into his team and into his coach. I don't really know them that well. I would highly advise that he change it up because he is extremely athletically gifted and he is only 25 years old. So he could be like an Anthony Smith in 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? He has the time, the talent to do it. He just has no idea how to implement that talent. It's clear. He has no idea what he's doing. He is extremely gifted, but zero understanding of actual fighting. I would imagine this would be like watching a 25-year-old Romero if he had never wrestled before, but you just threw him in a cage. Mm-hmm. He would do crazy shit, and you would just be weird. You'd be thinking, why are you doing this? But or at least Romero has, great Olympic and amateur wrestling pedigree to fall back on with technique and skill. Pereira has none of that at all. And I don't know where the hype train came from because the guy has 10 losses in the regional scene. So that's a clear red flag off the rip. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to say exposed, sure. But I would say the guy was exposed 10 times before he even came into the UFC. So it's not really a new thing that we learned. It's just something that I think we forgot due to a Danny Roberts knockout where probably most people only saw him in that one fight.
Yeah, I think it was a viral clip that went around of one of his fights in Road FC of him flipping around and doing a bunch of crazy stuff, and that was enough to get him signed to the UFC. That was enough to get people to notice. And we're always going to pay attention to someone who's doing something that unusual. But like you said, if you're doing something unusual in a sport like mixed martial arts, there has to be some level of intelligence and thought and strategy behind it. Let's even think back to and granted, this is to compare people against this guy is not really fair, but John Jones famously started his UFC career learning striking from YouTube and trying spinning techniques and trying some things that were unconventional, but there was clear science in what was going on. There was a clear level of logic to his approach.
Clear science and logic, and he had the fallback that if that didn't work, he could get double underhooks and tip you over and beat the piss out of you.
And then he sought the counsel of Greg Jackson. And then okay, this might be a tough question, but what camp do you think would help him immediately right out of the gate? Okay. My thought was Rufus-Sport.
Rufus-Sport was my first thought.
That would take that wildness, that insanity, the power, the striking, the flashiness, and turn it into focus it.
Sure. Because at his best, he is in the Anthony Pettis mold. A guy who has fundamentals, but is capable of doing spectacular things, branching off from that.
I will say this, though. Pereira, a guy that was taken down numerous times by a lightweight, I think going to Anthony Pettis' camp probably isn't the best long-term strategy because they never fixed that issue, obviously, for Anthony Pettis. Yeah. So you need some really good wrestling coaches there. You need some sort of good wrestling sparring.
You got Woodley and Askren though.
Woodley's at TriStar now.
Oh, that's right. He's TriStar, right?
Yeah. Make sure CM Punk is there.
He's just someone to beat up on.
To practice his striking.
Oh man,
flips around CM Punk. It'd be great.
Yeah, we're devolving rapidly, so we probably should go on and switch topics here. So. One last thing that we're going to talk about from UFC Fight Night 158, Todd Duffee, who had quite the anticlimactic return after a 4-year layoff against Jeff Hughes. Started out would look like to be quite the barn burner, but what wasn't the fight itself wasn't exactly what drew the most headlines. What drew the most headlines were his comments beforehand, before the fight began, where he addressed members of the MMA media and said that a lot of media members aren't truthful to maintain their access. So we've talked about the state of mixed martial arts media as certain fighters have commented on it. We've talked about it in terms of Luke Thomas's response to the Conor McGregor Ariel Helwani interview, and and it bleeds through in everything that we say because we are members of the media. But open forum once again, gentlemen. Do you think there's truth in Duffee's comments?
I'll jump in real quick.
Okay, Duffee.
From Duffee to Duffee.
Yep.
From Duffee to Duffee. I think he got some things right and he got some things wrong. I mean, during his fight week, leading up to the fight interviews, he definitely displayed a little bit of a persecution complex about how, the media is just here to tear down fighters. They don't build anyone up. I think he might be conflating media and social media a little bit.
Yes.
Considering that there's the very famous picture of him eating a burrito and surfing the Sherdog forums. I think there might be a bit of a blur there between the people that cover it on some sort of professional level and just the bathroom wall that anybody can write on. Having said that, even though he's wrong about that, I'm glad he said it. I'm right or wrong. I mean, he's clearly dying for the media to kind of jump up and be more real. But from what I've observed, the media is the same. They're kind of trying for a fighter to jump up and say something surprising other than in the most expected surprising ways. So I was fine with him kind of opening this avenue of discussion. And as far as him accusing the media of being reluctant to ask hard questions to preserve their access, I think he's absolutely right. And within the last few weeks, I've owned up and said that I've been a part of the problem. I covered UFC San Antonio live. By the end of that fight week, having been in the same room as Greg Hardy 4 times, I realized with a certain amount of regret that I had not asked some of the questions I wanted to ask, and I thought my outlet's readers probably wanted me to ask. It's definitely a real thing. And the funny thing is, I didn't care if my credential got picked up. I didn't give a shit less about that, but just it was kind of easier to just kind of let the line of questioning go as it was going and not really rock the boat. It's a mistake that I regret and one that I won't make again. I fully expect to lose my credential the next time I cover UFC event. Hopefully I don't do it for the whole, for the whole outlet. But, our editor-in-chief and I can have a talk when that comes up. So I think he's absolutely right. It is the big dynamic in MMA media right now. Because the biggest promotion in the sport has shown itself to be vindictive and more than willing to withdraw access from either individual journalists or entire outlets based on them asking unwanted questions, the dynamic is there. Do you want access or do you want integrity, or what you perceive as integrity in yourself? It's absolutely there. There is a certain amount of friction between the major sites in the space based on that. The ones that are perceived as kind of being more friendly to the promotions versus the ones that are perceived as being kind of more contrarian or renegade. It's what we have. And as long as the UFC is the biggest promotion in the sport, and as long as its leadership structure is as it is, and who knows, that may change if there's a sale, it's what we're stuck with. And, we're all kind of having to choose sides.
All right. So Matt, I know you've done a little digging around and trying to assign some stats, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to step on Jay's toes here, but
no, go right ahead. That's all yours.
Well, first, I just want to make one point. Whenever I hear people talk about the media as a monolith, that just makes my stomach churn. So first off, when begin a conversation about the media when just saying the media and don't assign outlets, don't talk about specific pieces, you actually, I think, sort of bring down the conversation a little bit. At least the conversation's open up for maybe people like us to elevate it a little bit. Shout out to Todd Duffee for at least starting it, but I don't think he really said it, I should say, eloquently at all. And I will agree with Ben, absolutely. The perception of media tearing down fighters specifically, I don't find that realistic at all. However, to his point about access, and I think that's one I think we all have had issues with because we interview people. Like if you interview fighters, you're going to come into a situation where you want to ask a certain question, but you know if you ask that question, you're going to get a response. So we've all come into it. I've come into it. I think we've all have. It's just a natural course of action within our small bubble of media. But I wanted to look a little more specifically at the coverage of media. So I looked at some of the major websites. Basically, I just did MMA news, looked at the top 5 websites, and the 2 biggest, I should say, stories of MMA right now, the antitrust hearing and Project Spearhead and just the unionization movement. I think those are the 2 biggest stories in MMA. And we can argue maybe they get underreported. So MMA Fighting, in terms of the antitrust topic, has written 2 articles on the topic that I can find. 2. I searched antitrust hearing, antitrust. I found 2 articles. The last one written in 2014 by Errol Hawani, who is now with ESPN. MMA Junkie, surprisingly though, credit to them. It's just 1 article though, but it's from the last hearing from a couple weeks ago. So a recent piece about it. So I know MMA Junkie gets a lot of flack. At least they have a recent article about this topic in some fashion. ShareDog. And when I search antitrust, okay, I only found 1 article written about it from 2014. I did more digging and I found it in other articles, but it wasn't in the headline. You had to do digging for this topic. So for any of those asking how I found these numbers, if it wasn't the topic, if it wasn't the headline of the article, I didn't include it because to me that it didn't bring value to the discussion. MMA News, they did 5 articles since last one 2018. BJPen.com surprisingly did 13 articles. The last one 2017 though, so nothing recent in the last 2 years.
And how many did they do on BJ's bar fights? But that's another story.
I didn't check that. Project Spearhead. Every single outlet, the same outlets I did for the first topic, they have not done an article this year on this topic, on unionization, on Project Spearhead at all. It's every single outlet was in 2018. Every article. MMA Fighting did 3 articles, 2018. MMA Junkie 2 articles, 2018. ShareDog 1 article, 2018. MMA News 2 articles. BJPen.com 4 articles, all 2018. So clearly there is underreporting on valuable topics, on important topics in this industry. I think we can have a nuanced discussion about why that is. Maybe because it's due to a multi-factored reason of those topics don't get views. So companies that hire us to write or talk about these topics don't incentivize us to really talk about these topics because they don't make us money, really. On top of that, to the whole access and pissing off the UFC, of course, these are the type of topics to upset the UFC. So, of course, these topics are going to be underreported in a way. So, yeah, I mean, I would say Todd Duffee is absolutely correct in that assertion that we fear losing access. Of course we do, because most of us, don't have a lot of power or leverage when it comes to any promoter in this space. UFC, Bellator, hell, in my beat, Matchroom, Top Rank, PBC, we as beat writers or beat reporters, we don't have the leverage to really battle them and keep our credentials. So that fear of access, and on top of that, the fear of losing revenue is important. I understand it. I mean, for my own channel, I don't do interviews on our show. I do that as a purpose, so we can at least talk and not be worried about opinions being stated on the show and piss off anyone that we're about to interview. But it's definitely an issue, is one that should be discussed more. But I do think Todd Duffee missed some very key points in discussing the topic and framing the topic.
Well, can I bring up one question? And this is just, we're throwing questions out there. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that it's not being covered, not for the reasons that were defined here in terms of concern of access or revenue purposes, but rather the lack of subject matter expertise? Because I know that these are very complicated subjects. Like, for instance, I'm an attorney, so I can break down different nuances that other people may not be able to do. But it's also it's a tough subject even for me that has had training and background information. I think of outlets, and I mean, you almost want a business analyst. You almost want somebody that has an MBA, that somebody has experience in the field.
People like John Nash,
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's
well,
exactly
like Pat OJ, who wrote, I think who's part of Sherdog, but I know he wrote an article on Body Lock MMA, another outlet he works for, about the antitrust suit. So shout out to Pat on that one.
And I think that might have something more to do with it. Not the question that they're that we're afraid to get a phone call about.
And also, maybe it's not just one of these issues. That's the reason why we have this issue. It's not, it's a multi-factored probable situation that all these issues compound to this fear of losing access.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I do. I definitely think that we can't, just not mention as many times as possible that Todd Duffee was confusing media with a lot of other things that have nothing to do with media. So, we're all very active on Twitter in the MMA space, and there are some accounts that we all follow and interact with that are fun, that are funny, that are witty, that give some sort of interesting insight. However, unless they are, actually publishing articles, unless they're actually putting podcasts out, unless they're boots to the ground doing the work in the sport, they are not members of media. They're fans with a platform. And there's nothing wrong with that, but to confuse the two seems a bit strange to me. I mean, I'm reminded of a story that Jeff Sherwood told once of how someone on the Sherdog forums said something bad about Kevin Randleman, and when he was at some Pride event to cover a Randleman fight, and Randleman stepped to him ready to whoop his ass. Not realizing that the guy who created Sherdog didn't write every single word that was posted on the Sherdog forum. So I think there definitely needs to be some separation that he and fighters and just people in general, anyone, if you are consuming the products of media, if you are participating in social media, realize that the two are different. Sometimes they overlap, but they're different. So very important thing.
I want to circle back to Jay's point about the expertise and the industry not really having a lot of experts on fields like this, which is a valid point. It's absolutely true. There aren't enough people that are experts on economics or just law, period, to voice their sort of expert opinions about this. But I will say this, a lot of these websites are big enough to hire someone to do it.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And, when
that would mean paying people.
That would be. Big websites, like MMA Fighting is a giant website. They're owned by Vox Media. That's a giant corporation. They have the funds to hire an expert reporter to talk about certain situations. They do. Okay. Like in boxing, we get the occasional Thomas Hauser expert report to come out, right? Somebody boxing scene will go hire him for a story to cover. I think there's value in that. And, we see a little bit with, like Bloody Elbow investing in people like Kareem Zidane and heavily reporting in the geopolitical landscape of Eastern European MMA. But that's not enough. It clearly isn't enough. So these big websites, some of the duty is on them to fund this because the small websites can't. Like I can't go to college and get a degree in economics, but I will talk about at least. I'll talk about John Nash's reporting. I'll talk about Paul Gift's reporting in Forbes. But as Jay said, there's not enough experts in the industry to talk about it. But I think there's room to hire them, and there's definitely funding to hire them, in my opinion.
Yeah, and as far as access is concerned, I mean, you mentioned Bloody Elbow, which consistently has put forth some of the best work from a pure journalism standpoint that the sport has ever seen. Mm-hmm. They are consistently putting out great material. Yet you will not find a single member of their staff represented at a UFC event because they don't like them. They are blackballed. I think I'm thinking back to someone who was a pioneer, a former Sherdog frontman, Josh Gross.
Yes.
Who's still banned from UFC events.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous. Josh Gross, who's probably the best pure reporter that the sport has ever seen, is still blackballed from the UFC. Until he got picked up by The Athletic, he was covering soccer matches. In addition to, boxing and MMA that was going on in Southern California. What a travesty. So I'm access is important to an extent. But I guess I think we also need to make sure that we have a full understanding of what sort of media we're trying to be. What sort of media member are you trying to be? Are you someone who wants to be the Kareem Zidane and go in and investigate the tough stories? Are you going to be the Mark Raymundi who's got his antennas up all the time and is scrambling around to get a story, but plays the line of still having good relationships, and doesn't compromise himself in that sense? Are you going to totally shell out and sell your soul to get the bag? Or are you going to simply voice your opinion, voice your thoughts, and consequences be damned? So there's definitely some questions that I think media members need to ask themselves about what exactly their goals are. What do they want to do? And then I think a lot of that will sort itself out. In the meantime, just consume the stuff that you like. It's that simple to all the fans out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Schmoes of the world, and then there's the Josh Grosses of the world. Yeah, it's like guys like Schmo, they have a purpose. Yeah,
they have a purpose. Guys like Josh Gross have a purpose. Guys like Submission Radio have a purpose. So not everybody has to do the same thing. Otherwise, you just have a lot of Ariel Helwani clones.
But to the point of like Todd Duffee, don't conflate these people that are obviously not the same in terms of media. You know what I mean? Like that's the key thing. People should be smart enough. You're adults. Like, come on, use some critical thinking here and realize that a guy like the Schmo or people on social media or forums aren't real journalists, aren't true. I'm not going to say media members because there are media, but they're not true journalists. And it's a very different thing, to be a journalist and then to be a media member, in my opinion. And then social media.
Big time. Like I don't hold, like if you just have a random podcast, I don't hold that in the same, your behavior or your words in the same regard as I'll hold Brett Okamoto. Right. I just won't, because we're talking about two different things here. I'll hold Luke Thomas's word over, his, like, what he says needs to be a bit above board than Johnny's face punching show. Yep. Because they're different. They're very different. All right. Now we're going to jump off the topic that, of course, this spun far from UFC Fight Night 158.
I like it.
But we did try to keep a consistent theme there. I do like the variants. But one thing about UFC Fight Night 158, as far as the names we mentioned, Justin Gaethje, Donald Cerrone, Michel Pereira, and Todd Duffee, very entertaining fighters. So that begs the question, gentlemen, and I'll start with you, Matt. Who is the most entertaining fighter in the UFC today?
I got to pick one, right? I can't be like stay on the fence and pick like four, right? You're gonna actually hold me to one.
I'll come back to you if you want.
I have your answer.
I have a list of like 20 names. And I was like, man.
Oh yeah, we ain't got time for no 20 damn names.
No.
Damn, no. Go back to me. I'll think of one.
All right, you first, Ben.
All right. I mean, obviously, it depends on what you find entertaining. That's in the eye of the beholder. For me, it is someone that delivers action fights. There are relatively few boring moments, and there were almost no boring fights, but combined with an actual high level of skill and actual contention. If I just wanted to see crazy shit happen, I would go to all the local events, which is exactly what I do. But when I'm talking about the most entertaining fighter in the UFC, I want someone who brings a combination of action, wildness, and legitimate high-level contention. For me, it's the guy we've been talking about. It's Justin Gaethje. He occupies the spot that Robbie Lawler occupied 3 years ago, that Anthony Pettis occupied 6 or 7 years ago, where you knew the fight was going to be a banger. There were no boring fights, something crazy might happen. But at the same time, they are doing this against the best fighters in the world. Like when Justin Gaethje joined the UFC, I didn't think it was going to carry over. I thought he was going to fight 1 or 2 fights and either wash out or be just another fighter. I did not expect him to be on the cusp of title contention 3 years later. Like the stuff he does, and he hasn't even changed his game plan that much. Like he's toned it down just slightly, but he's still basically doing the same thing he did in the Michael Johnson fight. Like it's Justin Gaethje. I mean, his knockout of tall Texan guy,
Vic.
Thank you. His knockout of James Vick, where he just felled him like a redwood with that right hook, jumped straight up on the cage, and did the backflip off the cage and stuck the landing all within the space of like 5 seconds of real time. I mean, that is a human achievement that very few people will ever match in this world. Like he's doing remarkable things. And I mean, we were talking about Michel Pereira just, a little while ago. It is the opposite of that. There are no smoke and mirrors. Like he is that gifted. He's that well trained. He's that well coached. He is that balls out. And he's actually making these crazy things happen against top level fighters. It's Justin Gaethje for me.
All right. What about you, Jay?
All right. Justin, no, I'm kidding. I'm not going to do the same thing. This is the kind of fun question, as Duffy mentioned, that my entertainment will be different than his, will be different than yours. Because when I look at entertainment, performance in the cage is number one. It has to be. If you're a fighter, you got to fight, however that may be. Do you look at it as entertaining as in like a just bleed fighter? Because then if so, Gaethje by armbar, there's no doubt about it. Gaethje to the top of the ladder. But I see it as the whole package. I see it as the in the cage accomplishments, the things you do, but also leading up to it. I'm not a sucker for the drama or the antics, but the persona, the atmosphere, the feeling around a fight. Now, Justin Gaethje has that presence. You go, oh, it's a Justin Gaethje fight. Something crazy is going to happen. But that's been in the fact, as I mentioned in an earlier discussion, since July 2017. So this is a 2-year phenomenon. We've had this feeling. When he was fighting in World Series of Fighting, he authored similar performances, but because there wasn't as much of a pushback, all respect to Josh Hill, but he got his legs chopped off. The fights that he had, the Jose Aldo Silvas of the world, weren't able to give it back. So it's exciting to a degree, and otherwise it's not. So when I think of all that put together, I got to give it to Tony Ferguson, because not only because his fights will be consistently entertaining, they've been so for a lengthy period of time. There's the anticipation and excitement. He has the persona, even though it can be a little sometimes depending. I mean, if you grew up, so to speak, watching Tony Ferguson and the "Where's Your Kid At" stage, maybe you might not like him as much. But in terms of the performances and the things he's done, other than there are people living in my walls, he's there. And Fight Week is exciting because Tony Ferguson's going to do something, and he might do something entertaining like trip on a cable and fall out of a fight the week before. That's not entertaining, but that's just you're
not selling it, Jay.
I am because I am. Let me circle it all back into one package. Because he's an enigma wrapped in a hurricane. Just something's going to happen when Tony Ferguson is going to fight, and that's a rare feeling you don't get very often. So I just think that does it for me, because you might not know something crazy is going to happen. So buckle up. So that's my pick.
All right. Good pick.
It's a great pick. I almost picked Tony too. Like Tony was in my short list when I got down to it, but he didn't make it. And the real most entertaining fighter in the UFC is obviously Max Holloway. I mean, when we talk about time and time again, thoroughly entertaining fights, and not only that, it has a cross section of entertaining. It has sort of the just bleed factor at times, like the Ricardo Lamas, let's stand in the center of the cage moment, right? I was there live for that. I remember screaming at the top of my lungs, like, oh my God, that was amazing. And you then have like tactical sort of picking apart of Jose Aldo, even guys like Frankie Edgar. You have the boxing ability that, again, I'm a boxing guy. I'm going to love. And again, I am really easy. So you throw to the body with any amount of body punches, you're automatically entertaining to me. Just by default, you're automatically in like the 1 percentile of fighters in MMA that do that. So Max Holloway is thoroughly enjoyable to watch. He is a tactical, brilliant mastermind in the cage, and also blood and guts at times. So he's just a great mixture of everything. Again, he has some of the best boxing in MMA, so I'm going to love that.
All good picks, fellas. All good picks. All guys that I would put on my list of most entertaining fighters, but you're all wrong. There is one man who deserves the title of most entertaining in the UFC. That man is named Yoel Romero.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait, you thought I was going to say something crazy, huh?
Connor.
If he still fought, maybe.
BJ Penn.
Because the action follows him everywhere. All right, so but Yoel Romero has to be the most entertaining fighter in the UFC from where I'm standing. You look at from when he entered the UFC against Clifford Starks on the Ben Henderson, Gilbert Melendez card, flying knee knockout. Above that, Ronnie Marks, KO by punches. Derek Brunson, he has one decision win, 2 decision wins. Jacare Souza, which probably wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing fight. However, he did smash him in the first round. Then Brad Tavares. Right now, that fight isn't exactly ringing my memory too much. Can't remember too many details from that one. But aside from that, he has been in so many great fights. Let's talk about the 2 fights against Robert Whittaker. Fantastic fight of the year worthy fights. Incredible stuff. The Machida knockout, the 3rd round blitz on Tim Kennedy after the ice was spilled all over the cage floor. Like Yoel Romero.
Let me add, and it was against Tim Kennedy. So thank you, Romero. That brother.
You saved Kennedy's daughter from one fake kidnapping.
Just remember September 12th. So yeah, like like Yoel Romero has consistently gone in there and done something spectacular. And there is a certain aura around him. Now, I was cage side for the fight against Paulo Costa at UFC 241, and that was like the Incredible Hulk fighting the Abomination. It was fantastic. It was one of the most entertaining things I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes. Yoel Romero is the most entertaining fighter in the UFC. There it is. All right. So
I will add one quick thing.
Yeah.
In a completely unscientific poll that means absolutely nothing on the Sherdog forums, a plurality gave it to Tony Ferguson. Just a whisker over Gaethje. So it is what it is.
So they're wrong too. Got you.
Although, yeah, I believe you.
Well, only because you disagree with me. That's all. But Tony Ferguson, I mean, all of our picks are incredibly entertaining guys. I actually was very close to picking Ryan Hall as well. Ryan Hall is an honorable mention on this one.
He's my number 2 as well. Like, dude, I mean, not to hawk my own wares, but as the curator of the hall,
yes,
like. If you're looking for fighters that do things kind of weirdly their own way, they march to the beat of their own drummer, but they were legitimately high-level competitors, Ryan Hall is up there. You should not be where Ryan Hall is in his career with the skill set he has. It's incredible that he does what he does in 2019. I love Ryan Hall.
If you can throw a head kick right into a low single, you're spectacular.
I kick into a low single into like a half spin from breakdancing into an Imanari roll.
Imanari roll, yes, there it is.
And that's like your default go-to strategy.
That's his jab.
Yeah, so he has a set of a jab.
It's a macro set.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like if you made a creative fighter on a game and you just didn't really round out his skill set, it would be Ryan Hall. Damn it, I love that man. Also,
the X button on your controller doesn't work, and you made a fighter without having to use that button.
yeah, that's Ryan Hall. Also, a DMV native. So shout out to the District, Maryland, and Virginia right there. Hometown love right there for Ryan Hall. All right, now we're gonna move on to a segment so beautifully named. I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons. I want you guys to tell me what was the thing that surprised you the most about the MMA events that took place over the weekend. We had LFA 76, we had KSW 50, we had UFC Fight Night 158. Anything related to pre-fight coverage, the fights themselves, or what happened afterward. Matt, I will begin with you, sir. What was your Mr. Falcon moment?
Well, first off, you definitely know I didn't watch LFA or KSW this weekend. I had way too much boxing this weekend to cover.
There's a reason why I started with you, Matt.
Yes. So what surprised me the most this weekend? Maybe I'll put it this way. What surprised me the most this weekend, it's not necessarily pre-fight coverage, it's fights themselves. Antonio Carlos Jr., I can't believe what he's turned into. Like, I know he's not going to be a champion ever, but I was really down on him when he was in, like, Tough Brazil. I always thought he was not going to be something. And he's clearly built himself into a top 15 middleweight. So kudos to him.
No. All right, Ben, what was your moment, Mr. Falcons?
I'm on the exact opposite end of that. I was just stunned at how Uriah Hall looked at UFC Fight Night 158 over the weekend. I thought the book had been written on this guy. Really, I thought the book had been written on him from the moment he lost his tough finale to Kelvin Gastelum. He was going to be the kind of wild, undertrained guy who depended too much on his athleticism and would always lose to better trained fighters. You know, and he's been on this pattern of win two, lose one ever since then for what has that been now, 4 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So going into the fight against Antonio Carlos Jr., I know that he had changed camps to Fortis MMA. And as much as, you know, I'm going to have instant love for anything from Texas, I know also the fallacy of fighters flocking to the hot camp of the moment. Because I've been here when the hot camp of the moment was Jackson. And then when it was Team Sichutong in Boston. And then when the hot team... Like... The hot team moves around and fighters flock to it, and most of them don't get any benefit. So when Uriah Hall was training with Fortis MMA, I was like, okay, but he's still Uriah Hall. Only he wasn't. He looked better in a sense of fight IQ than he has ever looked in his career by several orders of magnitude. Because normally when you're watching a Uriah Hall fight, he's either going to lose a miserable decision to a fighter he should probably beat, or he's going to hit that limit break and do something stupid to him. And neither of those things happened. He worked a game plan and beat a fighter who on paper was better. So I was stunned by how good Uriah Hall looked, and I did not think I'd find myself saying this in the last quarter of 2019, but I'm excited for his next fight. I want to see what he does next. I think he has potential to move into the top 10 in middleweight.
Bad decision.
I had the decision for Hall, but
I definitely had it for Carlos Jr.
But I'm surprised it even made it to decision. I expected him to get ground and pounded or tapped out.
Yes.
No, I'm with you on that one.
Conversely, I was always very high on Uriah Hall and always very down on Antonio Carlos Jr. So that's my opinion about this fight.
All right, Jay. So tell me, Mr. Falcons, what surprised you?
Well, real quick, let me pull up the play-by-play. I scored it for Hull. Okay, cool. All right. That left jab was beautiful. That was just that was Saif Saud, his whatever he did to get Hull in his game. I was so happy to see that because it's kind of like K1 Lumpany champion Khalil Roundtree. Just what just happened there. But my big I'm not surprised Mr. Falcons moment was Misha Cirkunov. So as I mentioned, I write the official SureDog.com play-by-play covering every fight from start to finish. I'm forced to watch the screen, excuse me, and I occasionally glance back and forth to make sure I didn't mess up my copy. I'm going back and forth like a filing robot. So I saw that Cirkunov was setting up a choke of some kind, and he was about to step over. So I look back at my copy and I see I misspelled something. And I go back to fix it, And as I look back, I had missed that Serkinov had stepped over to set up the Peruvian necktie. Now, so I just saw he grabbed a hold of the neck. I'm like, okay, it's a weird modified guillotine. What's going on? And so in the active discussion, when the fight ends with my colleagues, I say, what was that? What just happened there? Did I miss it? And I got clued in. It was a necktie. And on the replay, I saw, oh my God, he actually pulled that thing off. We've only seen it. Let's see. Once Brad Pickett nailed one in the WEC. CB Dollaway tapped out JT Money about 10 years ago. And 3, including Pat Curran, happened in Bellator. So that's 5. So this is like the 6th Peruvian necktie we've seen in major competition. Pride and WC, Strikeforce, Belt, you go through the list. And he hit that thing, and he hit it topside. When Jim Crute tried to roll over to escape it, if it had been a guillotine, he would have been able to roll out. So that was the good defense. Only Serkinov had him under the, just beautiful. Just, wow. That was something. I had to rewind the replay a few times and go, oh, man, he just set that up so perfectly. He knew what he wanted and he got it. Unlike Michel Pereira, who just kind of guessed when he hit buttons.
And also nice because Serkinov was kind of on a downward stretch, it seems like. He's been up down. He's had a lot of promise, and then he had the Ozdemir knockout that came out of nowhere. He just needed some height back in it. Yeah.
And it's also good to see him get a victory after, dealing with so much turmoil at home. So
yes.
Yeah, so that's honestly very, very good to see. All right, so I did already kind of mention how I was underwhelmed by KSW 50, and KSW normally puts on fantastic cards, so that was the exception and not the rule for anyone who was tuning into KSW for the first time on Saturday. Try again, please. They have much better to offer, but I'm going to stick with UFC Fight Night 158 for my Mr. Falcons moment here, and that is Nikita Krylov, who simultaneously is the most incredibly improved fighter on the UFC roster, but still just isn't quite there. Still just isn't quite good enough. So it's unfortunate. He looked very good in some isolated moments against Glover Teixeira. Previously, Glover Teixeira would have ran through him like there's nobody's business. Now, I think Teixeira clearly won that fight. I scored at 30-27 for Teixeira, not mad at the 29-28, not seeing how anyone was able to score it, including that judge that scored it for Krylov. Not sure how that happened. I believe there was 2 other gentlemen agreeing with you on the play-by-play, if I'm not mistaken, Jay.
I didn't think I thought I was being out of line. Yeah,
3 people that are wrong.
Let's just say I rewatched the fight and I changed my score, but it's too late.
Okay, well, I'm just saying you're wrong because you disagree with me. That's all.
I am. Okay.
That's just, it's more ego-driven than anything else. Nothing personal. So yeah, that was kind of my most surprising moment, to see someone so improved yet still not quite ready to hit that next level.
No, and I asked this on Twitter, kind of during the fight and immediately after, show me a fighter who has improved more as a fighter after his UFC debut than Nikita Krylov. Because he went from one of the worst heavyweights the UFC had signed in recent memory, which is saying a fucking lot, to a borderline top 10 light heavyweight when he was let go. And he was better than that when they brought him back. And people came up with other suggestions, Max Holloway, Robbie Lawler, people who were good but green and then became great, which wasn't really what I was asking. So I phrased the question wrong. What I really should have asked is, has there ever been a worse fighter who became a good fighter, under the actual UFC lights than Nikita Krylov? And I'm not sure that there is.
Maybe Matt Mitrione, but
Sadala?
And only because they debuted professionally in the UFC. Yeah. That's the only reation why they get mentioned in this conversation.
But, he entered the UFC as a 15-fight veteran who was nonetheless terrible and is now pretty good. But
Anthony Smith? In a way, Anthony.
Yeah, no, Anthony Smith is there as well, because at least he was just another guy. Yes. And nobody thought he would be anything other than just another guy. Right. And he actually made his way to title contention. So, he's the one that's up there for me in the same sense as Krylov, because Krylov was terrible. Now he's pretty good, but he is still capable of laying an egg at any given moment.
I wouldn't be mad at throwing Robbie Lawler in that mix also, considering when he returned to the UFC. considering the run he had in Strikeforce and how underwhelming that was at middleweight.
Well, I mean, it helped that he figured out that, he had like not
some respiratory problem that he needed to be in a humid climate.
So he moved down to South Florida, actually started sparring and doing cardio again for the first time in 7 or 8 years, and had a whole other life out of that. Yeah.
All right, fellas. So we do have an interesting question here about retirement's not sticking, but because of time, I want to table that till next week. I'm pretty sure next week somebody else will come out of retirement and we can talk about it.
Or one of these assholes will re-retire.
Yeah, something's going to happen really stupid, and we will have to address it. So let's give MMA the credit to be MMA and be ready and waiting for us next week. All right,
Jeremy Stevens will retire. That's my pick.
Oh, okay. Didn't see that one coming, but all right.
Weird.
All right, so I have a feeling our discussion about Mexico City is going to be interesting. All right, but let's start with my favorite part about this, the speed bag. That means I get to time you mofos. That means you're on my clock. Therefore, I will bring up my clock right now. And Ben, I'm really counting on you because it's been a long time since I got to cut you off. So I'm really counting on you.
Quick question, though, before we start. If we end a question early or an answer early, do we have rollover time?
Nope.
Absolutely not.
No rollover minutes.
No, you don't, you smart ass. Okay, so we're gonna start with Ben, my favorite person for these speed bag moments. We got a question about KSW 50. Now, we had some champions. I had 4 champions, I believe, competing on this card. Philip DeFries, the heavyweight champion, Tomas Narkin, the light heavyweight champion, Roberto Soldic, the welterweight king, and Norman Park, who is now the interim lightweight champion, which, strangely enough, they didn't mention interim at any point during the broadcast. So maybe he's the undisputed champion. We'll find out soon enough. Anyway, do you feel that any of these gentlemen stand a chance against their UFC counterparts? You have 30 seconds, my man, and go.
No, not much of one. For one, in the case of 2 of them, Philip DeFries and Norman Park, we've seen how they do against UFC heavyweights and light heavyweights, and it was not good. Now, DeFries has improved a lot in that time, but I still don't think he has much for Stipe Miocic. And Norman Park was just another lightweight in the UFC. He left the UFC. He missed weight a few times or fought at catchweights a few times in KSW. No.
And we're done. We're done. Bench. No respect for the clock. No respect for the clock. It's ridiculous. It's just, oh my God. No home training. No home training. So, Jay, I'm going to move on to you. And this is a story that's near and dear to your heart. You've been covering this one, doing fine work, if I don't mind saying so myself there. So you've got 30 seconds to answer this one. Where will LFA end up now that AXS TV has canceled its broadcasting deal? And go.
If they don't end up on UFC Fight Pass, we've done something wrong. There's already kind of an unspoken agreement with the LFA being the de facto feeder league of the UFC and the Contender Series. I mean, UFC has kind of plucked all their champions one by one. So that's got to be the fit. DAZN doesn't seem like a target because it bumped into their Combat America's coverage, which airs on Friday, and they don't want to counter-program themselves, so it has to be Fight Pass.
All right. Oh, just when I thought I was going to be able to cut you off and then graciously let you continue your thought, because this is a very important story. My benevolence was not needed. Totally unnecessary there. So now, Matt, the speedback question for you, and something that you were definitely paying very close attention to. Should the doctors have stopped the fight between Tyson Fury and Otto Wallin due to the cut? And go.
No, absolutely not. If the fighter can see and fight, then he should be allowed to fight. And Tyson Fury was saying numerous times, I can see, I can fight. Clearly was fighting effective beside the cut. So, no, they should have allowed it to continue. No issue.
Oh, I see why you were asking about rollover seconds there, because you definitely left a lot on the clock. Ben, please, no respect for Matt's time either, but I will allow it and go.
Well, I just my follow-up question is, do you think if that cut had been on Wallin's face, if they would have stopped it?
Are we talking about how the commission handles certain A-sides in sports, or are we talking about should they have stopped that fight due to that individual cut?
I'm talking. Well, I think they're both the same thing, because there is an objective. This is how I feel according to the rules. A cut should be treated, and then there's a subjective.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, there's money at play here. Do you think they would have stopped it if that same cut appeared on Wallin in the same round?
Probably.
Yes.
To answer your question, yes. But that is with the connotation of commissions and boxing and that such. But objectively, looking at the rules, I think no, they probably shouldn't have stopped the cut if it was on Otto Wallin either. If he was still fighting and being that tenacious with a cut like that, I'd see no reason stopping the fight.
Okay.
All right. So I guess I'll go ahead and start the clock for myself, and I'll do a brief rundown of all three questions here. So question one, Philip DeFries loses to Stipe Miocic. I think
Already did.
Yep, you sure did. I think that Kamaru Usman would defeat Soldic. John Jones, of course, is the greatest fighter of all time. And Norman Park, I don't think he stands a chance against Khabib. LFA would be nice to be on Fight Pass. That would be a good place to go. DAZN would also be a good option. But I don't think that'll happen because they don't have a connection to Bellator. And I don't think the doctor should have stopped the fight on the Tyson Fury cut.
I just want to add to the point of the LFA going where they should go. Why not directly ESPN Plus? You know, like I know PFL are now with ESPN2. You know, why not just have it all under the ESPN banner? Because obviously Fight Pass isn't a real priority in my opinion. I know they're putting Roy Jones boxing promotion events on, but hey, I'm a boxing head. I don't even care about those cards. So there's no real value in it anymore other than being a fight library. So ESPN Plus would be better for me because at least then it's all housed there. PFL, UFC, Top Rank Boxing, like the list goes on of just fights I can go on ESPN Plus, type in stuff and find. Yes, the user interface sucks, but at least it's all in one place.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it really matters to the average fan because if you are a fan of boxing and MMA, you probably have DAZN, you probably have ESPN Plus. You know, Fight Pass might be the one that you may not have unless you're diehard about Invicta. But other than that, there's those few options, and LFA will be fine pretty much in all of them.
So, got a question about the Fury Wallin fight. So, in between rounds, ESPN, the broadcast team, told Fury's Corner, and they told Fury's Corner the cut happened from a punch and not from a clash of heads because the referee initially said that it was a clash of heads.
Yes.
So ESPN corrected them. Now, this is a question and a comment because my take, of course, this isn't clear interference. This is a broadcaster interfering in the course of a fight by informing a corner of a result that happened. Anybody, I mean, Hunter, obviously, you're probably the first one to ask about it. But do you think that do you think ESPN erred by telling them to correct an error from the commission? Do you think this was something they shouldn't do?
It'd be like if I'm watching an NFL game and the NBC commentators walk down to Bill Belichick and tell him what the Falcons are running. To me, that's sort of the equivalent, right? So I think it's obviously an error by ESPN's side. It's not a surprising one because I'll be honest, the ESPN boxing commentary team has been criticized heavily by fans, by us in the media, for objectivity, for just professionalism on the whole. Same with the DAZN boxing commentary team. It's been pretty rough.
Yes. Yeah, it has.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah. I mean, we had a fighter that fought this last weekend in Jaime Munguia. He's been heavily criticized as a fighter. He gets a lot of easy matchmaking as a champion. Hasn't really even fought a real legit top 5 guy in the division yet, and he's a champion. And the DAZN commentary team is saying, he has the power of Eric Morales, like stuff like that. It's one championship level hyperbole. Yes, I will go there, okay? And the ESPN team is just as bad. So while I do understand in the moment Osuna thinking that was the right thing to do, but it wasn't. And hopefully they don't do it going forward. But I doubt it because I seriously have some issues and criticisms of the ESPN team. And again, their objectivity, the level of bias on the commentary team.
So this wasn't just showing a replay to the official.
So they went to it was in round corner interview. So they went to Ben Davison, the trainer of Tyson Fury, mid fight, mid round, and they're talking about the cut. And Ben Davison says, well, it was due to clash of heads, so we're not too worried if it gets stopped. It's a no contest or it's certain other things. It's not an issue. And I think it's Brandon Osuna is the ESPN sort of interviewer's name, not the he's not a commentator, so to speak. He said right then, well, it wasn't due to headbutt, it was due to a legal punch. The Nevada commission ruled via replay. And from that point on, it was kind of clear that a game plan had shifted for Fury.
It was absolutely a different fight.
It was evident.
Yeah. Yep. Yes.
Okay. All right. So, definitely now we'll shift back to mixed martial arts here, because we do have pretty interesting main event in Mexico City this weekend. The Korean Zombie Zombie fell victim to an elbow from Yair Rodriguez, who now has since iced his elbow. It's not swollen anymore, and he will be hoping to put it upside the head of one Jeremy Stephens this weekend. So tell me, gentlemen, what fights appeal to you on the card? And what is your pick for fight of the night?
Ben,
Duffy.
I'll jump in. I mean, the main event seems custom built to be a fight of the night. They are two of the most reliable action fighters in the UFC. It's rare that you find two reliable action fighters that are in the same division and are both top 10 fighters. Nothing would make more sense than to put them together, and the UFC actually did. So, I mean, Rodriguez versus Stephens is the fight to make. I do favor Rodriguez in this one. I just think he's a better fighter at this point in their respective careers. But he is also... he's shown himself capable of losing fights that he shouldn't. So, I mean, there's plenty of suspense there. It's a great main event, good main event for where they're having the fight. And as you make your way down the card, it's the usual drum I bang, where there are a lot of individual fighters that I'm excited to see, not as many matchups where I'm excited about both sides of it and what it means for the division and what it promises in terms of fireworks. Esparza versus Grasso. I mean, the UFC has been trying to put Grasso over ever since they prematurely plucked her from Invicta as someone who was in line for a title shot. I mean, she was probably going to be the next challenger for Angela Hill's title when they plucked her in 2016, but she was super young. She was Mexican. She was really exciting. She's objectively pretty. She was just exactly what the UFC wanted, so they grabbed her. And she turned out not quite to be ready for UFC level competition yet. She's gotten there now, but she's taken a couple of L's in the process. Carla Esparza is the perfect test for her. It should be an exciting fight. It should be a good test for Grasso. The rest of the card, I'll be there for it. Nothing really jumps out at me.
I agree in most parts of what Ben is saying. Obviously, Rodriguez-Stephens should be a blockbuster fight. Two action fighters. I'm hoping Rodriguez wins because I've been a big fan of him for a long time. And like I said, sort of about Grasso, same sort of with Rodriguez. He's been a guy that's been set up to be the next heir, the next king of the featherweight division, time and time and time again. And he's come close so many occasions. The Frank Yeager destruction is fine right now. But that war with Korean Zombie is also there. So hopefully we get that version of Yair Rodriguez, that on point Rodriguez that really sticks to his game plan, and plus trust in his ability, because he trusts that he was going to land that elbow. It landed. It had the desired effect in the 5th round. And Jeremy Stephens is one of those guys where he is. If this was 3 years ago, I would pick Jeremy Stephens without a doubt. But it's 3 years past now, and Yair Rodriguez is getting better, and Jeremy Stephens is objectively deteriorating as we're watching him. And he is the type of guy that's going to deteriorate faster and faster with each fight. But it still should be a fun fight. I agree in all parts of what Ben is saying about Esparza, Grasso. I've always been a fan of Grasso. Hopefully she gets the win here because, again, she's been a name that if she wins and is successful in the division, she could be a potential star and break into a market. Also, shout out to Brandon Moreno. I've always been a fan of him. He's always been fun to watch. Always just a fun person to watch in interviews too. Has a good personality. And also think the UFC treated him awful in terms of just letting him go after the whole Ray Borg situation, and then he had, I think, a one loss after that. 3 canceled fights with Ray Borg, and he had 1 loss, and then they cut him. I'm glad that he's back. Hopefully, he gets a win against a really tough, undefeated Russian fighter. Angela Hill on the card. Always a fan of Angela Hill. Sergio Pettis on the card. Like Ben said, a lot of fighters that I like, not necessarily matchups I'm like over the moon about.
All right. What about you, Jay?
Well, this is another, and I keep harping on this. I've harped on this too. Another one of those cards where they bill a card around a fight. And that, to me, feels more like a boxing model than it does an MMA model. They have a great fight, objectively a great fight. Yair Rodriguez, Jeremy Stephens shouts action from the rooftops. Now, it doesn't matter that Stephens is on the fifth multiple fight losing streak of his career. He's on a 2-fight skid, but he lost to Aldo and Zabit. So, okay, that's excusable. But then you're putting him up against Yair, so to potentially give him, this is tailor-made for Yair. Win in front of the home crowd, Mexican hero, blah, blah, blah. So they're setting this up, which is always what happens, and it means Jeremy Stephens will knock his block off. Otherwise, there are these counter fights that you go, ooh, okay, all right, I see that. But as a card itself, the cohesiveness is local talent, local fighters, relatively speaking. And let's put them up with some interesting fights. Let's see what happens. Maybe some winnable fights. But there's a few things. Sergio Pettis is going back down to featherweight or flyweight. So we'll see if he makes weight. And Hunter touched on this briefly. Assassin Baby or Baby Assassin, Brandon Moreno is rolling again. He had a bad way. They had the big flyweight purge and fired everybody. And then started saying, wait, we actually should not do this and bring people back. So they brought him back, and then they signed Askar Askarov. Now, not a name to people, but he's a 10-0 wrecking machine at flyweight, which is a weird thing to say because flyweights, you don't think of destruction and stuff like that. No, this guy has serious potential. Like, he's been fighting an ACB, so level of competition's okay. We'll find out what happens. But this guy hit a twister not long ago. That's something. To hit a twister is pretty impressive. 10-0, 10 finishes. I've been high on this guy for about a couple of years now. I've been wanting to get him ranked on the flyweight roster because he's one of the few that's still going strong like this and not moving up or pressure or anything. I think that's going to be my obvious main event fight of the night. But if not, and let's get weird, got to go with Askarov Marino as my fight of the night pick.
One more get weird pick. Okay.
We'll say Betchkahea Sajara.
Don't you say it.
Yes, Sajara.
Because that was definitely my weird pick right there.
Yeah.
Because that fight looks like it could be so bad that it's spectacular.
Exactly.
That fight sounds terrible, but damn it might end up being the best thing on the card. It just might be. So I think it's notable too for the Sergio Pettis returning to flyweight that he had a failed stint at bantamweight, which I think he lost that fight to Rob Font on the last Fox card, I believe it was. Yes, and he's fighting another failed bantamweight in Tyson Nam. So you think about Sergio Pettis, had he won against Yusuf Formiga at, I believe that was UFC 229, I think it's very possible that the talks of the flyweight division going away would not have been as strong because that Pettis name being in the title title contention would have meant something.
Absolutely. He convincingly beat Joseph Benavidez.
Yes, sir.
Like beat Joseph Benavidez by shutting down Benavidez's game. He defended 9 of 10 takedowns.
So many takedowns.
But for a few things panning out slightly differently, why are y'all laughing?
Oh, because
we said background vocals of
just so many takedowns.
So many takedowns.
I'm echoing it, just picturing the fight in my head. It was background vocals.
Like the assistant coach on American Pie.
Or Motown, back up.
Culmination.
I was like, God, did I get someone's name wrong? No, Pettis has been so close.
So close.
And
sorry, man.
All right. I'm almost afraid to say my other thing. Who knows what'll come out of this dude's mouth? No, I'll just wait.
Beer.
Weigh in. Yeah, that's one beer too. Do you know how much booze I've had in this cup? I'll just weigh in with my one time every 3 months statement that Angela Hill is the walking testament that the UFC does not know how to promote an African-American fighter that presents in any way other than the most stereotypical. Like she is past Tyron Woodley in that regard. Like, she is a charismatic and charming and attractive and very good fighter who also happens to be like a nerdy cosplayer, and she should be one of the biggest stars in the sport, and she isn't.
Seriously, one of the nicest people that you can meet in MMA. Also, a DMV native. So yeah, PG County represent. I will say that every time the name Angela Hill is mentioned.
I'm next door from the white flight suburb of Montgomery County. So
definitely got pulled over by the cops many a time in Montgomery County. So yes.
I'm so sorry.
I want to circle back to what Jay mentioned, because Jay sort of briefly said this, that the UFC, and he's right, that UFC was going to cancel the flyweight division. We're firing everyone. And then all of a sudden, clearly decided not to do that and are rehiring guys. You guys are more on the beat of MMA. Why is that? None
of us have any fucking idea.
I wish we knew.
No, seriously, none of us know.
They cringed their way back. They cringed their way back.
Does the UFC not know what they're doing either? Is this just them working on a day-by-day basis with this division? Is there no long-term strategy here?
That's
just basically what it is?
That sounds about right.
Because they simultaneously said, we are not getting rid of the division, meanwhile cutting 2/3 of the roster.
Yeah. At one point, they only had like 8 flyweights on the roster.
Exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. I mean, Matt Hunter, you were the number 9 flyweight in the UFC at one point.
Yeah.
I
made a joke on Twitter about that douchebag Bagel Boss or whatever, that when he started training at the whatever gym it was, Weidman's gym, and I said, like, had this happened 2 weeks ago, he would have been the number 5 ranked contender. Just it was just that thin.
We laugh about this, but I made this point a few months ago, and it still holds. I mean, it's true. Casey Kenny was the 15th ranked flyweight in the world, despite never having fought in the UFC. At the time, he was ranked and he was in the Contender Series, but he did not fight in the UFC. He wasn't signed. He went on to have another LFA fight, but they had him ranked.
And wasn't that LFA fight in a different weight class? Was that a bantamweight fight?
The interim bantamweight championship, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So, bang up job over there, fellas.
But yeah, I mean, if the Cejudo Johnson fight had turned out differently, that rematch where Cejudo won, I have the feeling they would have shuttered the division and moved Johnson into a mandatory unification bout against the bantamweight champ. Yeah. They looked to be closing it down.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and move on from this. So our last segment, the buried treasure. So I want you guys to share with me a story in the MMA world that, for whatever reason, whether it's just flown under the radar, whether no one cares, or whatever, just overshadowed by so many things that happen in this crazy sport, that's not getting a lot of attention. Ben, I'll start with you.
Okay, this is getting some attention, but it's not getting as much attention as it should. The antitrust suit against the UFC is bringing real numbers to the people. It is the thing that people have been talking about for 10 or 15 years of wanting and waiting to see. It's happening. And while it's making news, I don't understand why this isn't the biggest news in the sport every single day. What you want to do is you want to go to Twitter, you want to follow John Nash and Paul Gift.
Yes.
And what you'll see is actual pay-per-view numbers during the UFC's first salad days and then later salad days. And the numbers that we've been depending on all these years, Dave Meltzer's estimates on pay-per-view buys, we're discovering that they weren't right. They were off. They were off on the high end, and they were off on the high end by 15 or 20% in a lot of cases. That is a lot of pay-per-view buys to be off by. And I'm not accusing Dave Meltzer of being dumb or dishonest or anything. I mean, he was the best thing we had at the time. But things he was saying were 1.6 million buys were 1.3. Things that he was saying were 1.1 were not a million pay-per-view buys. The UFC's had a lot fewer million sellers than we thought. Some of the people that we've accepted uncritically to be the blockbuster sellers of all time were not the big sellers that we thought. So please go see those things. Like, inform yourself. If you've been a hardcore fan for a long time, these are the things that you wanted to know. You wanted to know if the UFC was lying to you about it. You wanted to know if Meltzer was right at all. And it's all out there for you now. You want to know how much the biggest or how much the best paid fighters in the UFC were making in 2008 or 2010 or 2013. You can know now. If you want to know Brock Lesnar's 3 biggest pay-per-view sellers, you can find that out now, and it's right out there. And I don't understand why there isn't more conversation about it.
Yeah, and only 1 million plus seller, and that was UFC 100 that had everyone else on it. So interesting fact there. And we definitely saw the reaction from Matt when you started telling what your buried treasure was. I have a feeling Matt had something similar, so let's add to that, Matt.
It was very similar. So luckily, Ben didn't go over enough of ground that I wanted to cover as well, so I'll add some points. But
that's a personal challenge, Ben, by the way. So continue, Matt.
Follow John Nash, follow Paul Gift, Jason Cruz as well. They all 3 were at the hearings for most of the week. I think Jason Cruz left around halfway through. Check out the Show Money podcast. Just do that, okay? I'm telling you to do that because you should as a fan of the sport. On top of that, John Nash, in terms of the figures and the wage revenue and information that we now know, he just put out an article today about that on Bloody Elbow. Go check that out. This story is, like Ben said, should be the number 1 story that's talked about. It is massive because if they win, and from the reporting of Paul Gift and Jason Cruz and John Nash, it's looking good for the fighters at this point in time. And that's a very positive sign. Project Spearhead may have failed, let's be honest, but this is probably the closest thing we can get to some sort of equity with fighters and wage shares. And for sort of comparison, for boxing, the average wage share for fighters, for promoters, is 70%. So fighters, for boxers, I should say, get 70% of the revenue on average, comparative to UFC fighters who get around 20% nowadays. It's a massive difference in combat sports when there is no reason for that. Also, we'll add the second quarter earnings came out for both Endeavor and the UFC because they're filing for the IPO to go public, obviously. MMA payout, Jason Cruz reported, Endeavor had a revenue in the second quarter of over $1 billion. And the UFC revenue in the second quarter was over $700 million. So the UFC is a massive money-making machine right now. Fighters, go get what you are worth. Go get what you are deserved, okay? Contact John Fitch. Contact whoever you need to contact, but do something, please. And this should be reported far more often by far bigger websites than even ShareDog or even like small websites or outlets like my little tiny outlet. You know, like big outlets should report this, and it's a shame that they're not.
All right. Jay, what's your buried treasure for the week?
So I was reading this site the other day, and it's called Bloody Elbow. And what they have is a series of report. No, I'm kidding. So I broke this story. I cover news for ShareDog as well. I broke this story on Friday, speaking with an executive for AXS TV, that AXS TV will no longer be airing LFA shows. They have ended the broadcast deal. Now, this is a hit because the LFA has been a great feeder league, and they always put basically weekly, they put on great shows. They're reliable for entertainment, regional, what have you, to show the next stars of the sport. And that's over, effective immediately to the end of the year. And this is a big hit for the community because AXS TV, for those that weren't sure, used to be HDNet, owned by Mark Cuban and everything like that. For the past 15 years or so, they've been airing MMA events by the hundreds. I mean, you think of all the organizations. In the very early days, WEC was there, Strikeforce were there early on before their deals. Dream, Sengoku, K1, Lion Fight, Legacy, Resurrection. You just name. They were all there. There is no MMA programming of any kind on AXS TV anymore. And this is a combo breaker of the saddest levels. We lost Inside MMA, which was a great and entertaining weekly MMA news show year and a half, 2 years ago. It's been a good little while. but we still have the LFA left to have that little bastion of other MMA that we can still see on TV. So that's gone. But I guess the good news for 12 people is that they're adding wrestling programming to the network. They're adding Impact Wrestling, and they're adding that AAA Lucha Libre show. So if you heard about Cain Velasquez doing his flips off the top rope, he is going to be part of the show on Friday night. So that's the time slot that the LFA used to occupy that they're getting now. But I guess if there was a small upside, is that they were clear to explain to me this isn't the end of the MMA relationship. We still, the parent company, Anthem, still owns Fight Network, which is bigger in Canada, and there's a few things here stateside. They may come back to MMA in 2020, but they're killing the programming for 2019. So cross our fingers.
Yeah.
Just that as a younger fan of MMA, because I'm only 24 years old, right? So I remember becoming a fan when HDNet was around, right? I remember finding Inside MMA with Baz Rutten. I'm going like, oh my God, Baz Rutten has a new show. What is going on here? And remember at the time, like podcasts weren't really what it was. Yeah, obviously the SRN, but you really didn't have video podcasts like the way it is now. That wasn't a thing. YouTube shows weren't what it was like it is now. So you really had Inside MMA. You had John Annick's ESPN 30-minute show that came on at 4 a.m., 3 a.m.
MMA Live. Yep.
Yeah.
Which is coming back now.
Those were the two bastions of almost like credibility for the sport. Like I remember looking at those and going like, see, like our sport has real news shows like baseball, like basketball, like football. Like this is the closest we're going to get to what is mainstream sports coverage, right? And like you said, HDNet housed everything that wasn't the UFC, and at that time, probably Strikeforce, or even probably before then, like Elite XC or something like that. And it built so many names that you would then find out if you were more of a casual fan in the UFC or in other promotions. So it was just an indispensable platform and network for MMA. And it's kind of sad that it is gone, and at least for the time being, it is sad. It
was really the home of Japanese MMA post Pride.
Yes.
You know, at the time I was a bartender, and I'd be closing down a bar at 2-3 in the morning, and when I got home, I'm turning on Sengoku, I'm turning on Dream, and you know, seeing Shinya Aoki break a man's arm and give him the finger. You know, seeing some pretty interesting things from the Japanese side of mixed martial arts, in addition to being able to watch some of the smaller shows as well. So AXS TV's hand in MMA, it's the end of an era. Now my buried treasure for the week is the gift that keeps on giving, Dmitry Smoliakov, who has popped for EPO in an out-of-competition test. Now, what I find more surprising about this is not that Smoliakov was in fact popped for banned substance. Doesn't shock me in the least bit. What does shock me, though, is that he was under USADA testing, meaning that he was actually still a part of the UFC roster. That is the most surprising part about all of this. Remember, after Greg Hardy absolutely annihilated Smoliakov, Dana White was on the podium in the post-fight presser wondering how this fight even took place, wondering how Smoliakov was ever back in the UFC, and forgetting the fact that he, in fact, booked it himself, probably. But still, this man, after getting annihilated by Greg Hardy, proving that he does not belong in the UFC for a second time, then somehow is still on the roster to pop for EPO. So
can I add one bonus point?
What's that?
He also popped on Fight Night for EPO and steroid. HCG, a steroidal type substance.
That's a fertility drug that's used to cycle off. Yeah, so I didn't even realize it was the in competition test. It was
multiple times.
And in his post fight test, he tested positive for high levels of Greg Hardy's foot, which he admitted to having administered rectally.
I saw that report too, Ben.
Yeah, and you know, Rumor has it
I'll
also
allow it.
on the test because he tested positive for Greg Hardy's foot. There was also estrogen that was found in the system as well. So think about that one. Now, that will conclude this edition of Unleashed. And yes, that is a working title, but it's what we're working with right now. So stick around. Hopefully to bring some more fun programming to the Walkout Network. I have the backing of my good friends, Jay Petrie, Ben Duffee, and of course, you all know Matt Hunter, who has jumped on this network before. I jump on his all the time, so follow him on Mixed Combat Radio. In fact, maybe instead of me telling everybody where to follow y'all motherfuckers should tell everybody yourselves. So, Matt, I'll start with you.
Of course, you can follow me at Matt Hunter MCR, all platforms. And like Anthony said, Mixed Combat Radio is my combat sports channel. Find that YouTube, podcast from anywhere. Also, Trending Now Network if you want more movies, TV content as well.
All right. Ben, where can the good folks find you?
I'm Ben Duffee. I'm a senior editor at SureDog.com. I'm at Benjamin Duffee on Twitter. Or if you really want to know what I'm about, I am the curator of the Hall of Fucking Awesome. All you got to do is go to that URL right there. We have a new inductee as of this past weekend. That would be the late and lamented Evan Tanner. And we're about to kick it off. We're going to start inducting people probably on a monthly basis. So if you're thinking about, hey, what about that fighter way back then who was fucking awesome? Go look for him at the Hall. All
right. And, of course, Jay, where can everyone out there watching find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at jpetry, Jaypettry. I am the statistician and everyman at SureDog. You can find me at SureDog.com. There's a little features section, and at the features drop-down, I'm right there, and I'll be covering news and the play-by-play and post-fight analysis and yada, 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 yada. So I'm everywhere you want to be in the fight world.
You can also find Jay shopping alongside Jeff Wagenheim. So,
yes, sir.
I am Ant Walker. As you know, you can follow me on Twitter at Ant Walker MMA. Also, my Instagram. Yes, and you're already watching this on the Walkout Network. So like and subscribe that shit. Share it. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. So he's Matt Hunter. He's Ben Duffee. He's Jay Petrie. And I'm Ant Walker. And for all of us, you got to stay beautiful. You got to stay positive. And through it all, you got to stay sexy. I will see you when I see you. Peace. And stop recording.